Our country is no longer recognizable to me. My nephew's death has changed me. I was never a person to speak out, but what has happened to my nephew needs to be told. This story needs to be shared far and wide. My name is Jerry Perna. My nephew, Matthew Perna, walked through the Capitol on January 6th. He didn't break anything. He didn't harm anyone. He had no altercations with police officers. What followed next was his picture being on the FBI website a week or so later, and he was charged with misdemeanor charges, which were quickly escalated to a felony charge of obstruction of Congress, even though he was not in the building during the session of Congress that day. We obtained an attorney, and over the next 13 months, Matt experienced the worst nightmare of his life. Social media and the local news and national news were brutal. They ripped his life apart. His community, which he loved, turned on him. He had many, many friends, and he had many pastors who were talking to him and counseling him. But no one could tell Matthew what the future held for him. So as the months went on, Matthew stopped doing all the things he enjoyed. He was an avid runner. He had a successful business that was quickly taken away from him when all of his social media accounts were taken down. He gave away his television. He stopped going out in public. Around December of that year, Matt had had enough, and his attorney had encouraged him to plead guilty to the charges and that he would receive a sentence somewhere between 6 and 12 months in prison. So Matt pled guilty. He pled guilty, and it was something that I really wished he hadn't done. But I knew at the same time he was deteriorated to the point where he would never have been able to wait for the trial, which are taking years for the January 6ers. So his sentencing hearing was scheduled for March, and a week before, his attorney informed him that the prosecution was seeking to add a sentencing enhancement of terrorism at his hearing. If the judge accepted this, it could have taken his sentence to 9 years in a federal prison. That week, I talked to Matt on the phone, and he was sobbing. I could barely understand him. And I kept telling Matt, don't worry, God's got your back. This is not going to happen. You're not going to prison. But I could not convince my nephew, and none of us could in our family. We tried our best. But that Friday evening, February the 25th, Matthew walked into his garage and he hanged himself. And our family will never be the same again. Not only did Matthew die a tragic death, he died at the hands of our DOJ. Matt believed in our country. He loved our country from the time he was little. He had a fascination with the American flag, and that continued throughout his life. Matt was 37 years old. He had traveled the world extensively. He had been more places than the average person will ever see. He loved people. He didn't have a racist bone in his body. He didn't care what religion or political affiliation you had. He could talk to everyone. And he could do it and agree to disagree respectfully. He is so sadly missed. And I am angry. I am angry to see that a man's life was cut so short because of what has taken place since January 6th. I don't think people realize how many lives have been ruined. We are not just talking about the accused. We're talking about their entire families. Their children have been bullied. They've lost their homes, their livelihood, their retirements. Families have turned against them, and their communities have ostracized them. And it's not over once they serve their sentence. They come out, but Google lives forever. They are never going to have the life back that they once enjoyed, all because of a couple minutes walking through the people's house, or maybe just standing on the lawn there. If you think that we have freedom of speech in this country, you are delusional. And what they have done with the January 6ers is instill fear in the American public so that they will not speak out at a school board meeting or a council meeting. They will not stand on a street corner and shout their beliefs. They want everyone to be quiet and go with the flow. Our country is no longer recognizable to me. My nephew's death has changed me. I was never a person to speak out. I was never considered a public speaker by any stretch. I just lived a very quiet life. But what has happened to my nephew needs to be told. This story needs to be shared far and wide. He was a wonderful, wonderful young man. He was so handsome. He was so kind-hearted and very generous at the same time. But our Department of Justice didn't care. Shortly after Matt hanged himself, I called the prosecutor on the case. And surprisingly, he returned my phone call the following day, but I was on a recorded line, and I was told so, that there were several witnesses on the line. And I told this person, I said, what you did by bringing this terrorism enhancement is what killed my nephew. And he said many people in the Department of Justice felt very bad when they heard about Matt's death. And I responded, many people in the Department of Justice are responsible for Matt's death. And I told him that I hope when he goes to sleep each night, the last thought that will cross his mind is my nephew, Matthew Perna, and the part he played in his death. I don't know if that man will think of him anymore. I don't know if Matt's story is just yesterday's news. But for me and my family, it is not. We live it every single day. Every day. We ache. We cry, and we miss him. Something awful. And I want you to know that if you think this can't happen to your family, you are mistaken. And I receive so many beautiful letters and emails, and people tweet. But at the same time, I receive some of the most hateful, unimaginable messages and emails sent to me. And I think that this is the part that has made it all the worse. Not the fact that they send these messages to me, but the fact that I have come to realize how much hate there is in this world, that you could disparage a person who's dead to a family who's grieving him. It's unimaginable to me to hold that much hate inside your heart. But I never thought for a moment I would ever see it directed at my nephew and me and my family the way we have. But I am here to tell you, you can continue sending your messages because they're not going to break me. They're not going to break my family. God is watching you, and you will answer for those someday. But for now, as Americans, you have got to share this story. You have got to pay attention to what is happening to the rest of the J6ers. There are people who committed crimes that day, and they deserve to be punished. And I am not condoning violence, and I never will. But I am going to say my nephew did not commit an act of violence that warranted the punishment that they were wanting to throw at him. And many of the J6ers are facing that same fate. They're getting sentenced years and years in prison, while rapists and murderers are sometimes given much less, or they're just set free. We had the George Floyd riots and the BLM riots, the Antifa, the buildings that were burned down, the cities that were destroyed beyond repair. And nothing happened to those people. Why? They were exercising their freedom of speech. Well, so were the J6ers. Our Congress people have a few that have spoken out on behalf of the January 6ers. We have waited and waited for them to do something to help them, but they're not. I don't know if they can help in any way or if they refuse to help, because it seems to be the subject of January 6th is the elephant in the room and no one wants to talk about it. January 6th is only the beginning. Wake up, people. Wake up. Speak up and pressure your people in Congress to do the right thing for a change. They've got to stop talking and start doing. And until they do, we are a country that is going to continue to decline. And I'm afraid that we are not that far from being a society where you will be afraid to say anything publicly. I am asking you to visit my website, www.rememberingmattperna.com, to read his entire story. We are starting a foundation in Matt's name, the Matthew Lawrence Perna Foundation, and we are going to continue Matt's generous legacy through that foundation. Also, I would like to tell you that Congressman Louis Gohmert, before leaving office, sponsored the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene co-sponsored it. They are the only two Republicans that sponsored this bill. The only two. And it is probably sitting in some pile somewhere. And I encourage you to ask your representatives to bring this bill to the table. The items in the bill are included on my website, and many of them could have changed the course of Matt's life had they been enacted. I can never bring my nephew back. I know that. I could talk until the cows come home, and nothing I say or do is ever going to bring him back. And often people will say your family should sue. The pain that we experienced over that entire episode, watching our family member decline, was too great. And his death was unimaginable for us. If we were to pursue anything legally, we would have to watch his name get dragged through the mud constantly. And that is more than we could bear. And frankly, no amount of money will ever bring him back or ever take our sorrow away. I thank you for this time, and I thank you for listening. May God bless you.
For more great videos, download the Walkaway Social app at walkawaysocial.com. Share your testimonial and join our community.